It started as a typical Saturday night. I was lounging on my couch, scrolling through my phone, when I decided to order some dinner. I picked my usual Thai place, Tom Yum Paradise, and placed an order for pad Thai and spring rolls. The app notified me that my delivery would arrive in 45 minutes. The minutes ticked by slowly. I tried to distract myself with a movie, but my growling stomach kept interrupting. Finally, the app chimed, "Your order is on its way." The delivery driver's name was Sam, and the car icon on the app began moving towards my apartment. About 30 minutes later, I heard a soft knock at my door. It was strange because usually the drivers buzz my apartment from the front gate. I peeked through the peephole and saw a man standing there in a dark hoodie, holding a brown paper bag. I opened the door, and he handed me the food with a blank expression. "Thanks," I said, but he didn't respond. He just turned and walked away, disappearing into the dimly lit hallway. I brought the food inside and set it on the kitchen counter. As I unpacked the bag, I noticed something odd. The container for the pad Thai was different. It wasn't the usual white plastic box, but a plain, old-fashioned metal container. A small note was taped to the lid. "Enjoy your meal." My curiosity piqued. I opened the container. The pad Thai looked normal, but the aroma was different, more pungent and unfamiliar. I was starving, so I decided to take a bite. The first mouthful was incredibly spicy, much more than usual, but I liked spicy food, so I kept eating. After a few bites, I felt a strange sensation. My vision blurred, and my head started to spin. I staggered to the sink and splashed water on my face, but the feeling only got worse. I stumbled to my couch and collapsed, my body growing weaker by the second. As I lay there, struggling to stay conscious, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Tom Yum Paradise. "We regret to inform you that your delivery driver, Sam, was in an accident and will not be able to deliver your order. We apologize for the inconvenience and will issue a full refund." Panic surged through me. If Sam hadn't delivered my food, who had? I tried to get up, but my limbs felt like lead. My vision dimmed, and the room around me started to warp and twist. Suddenly, I was no longer in my apartment. I was in a dark, windowless room, the walls closing in on me. I heard footsteps approaching, and a cold, menacing voice whispered in my ear, "You shouldn't have opened the door." I screamed, but no sound came out. The last thing I saw was a pair of cold, lifeless eyes staring back at me from the darkness. When I woke up, I was back in my apartment, but something was different. The walls seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, and shadows moved on their own. My phone buzzed again, another message from the restaurant. "Your order has been delivered. Please rate your experience." I looked at the metal container on the counter, now empty. My heart raced as I realized the food delivery wasn't just a meal. It was an invitation to something dark and malevolent. And now it had found me. The days that followed were a blur of paranoia and dread. Every sound seemed amplified. Every shadow seemed to move with intent. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I barely slept, and when I did, my dreams were plagued with the image of those cold, lifeless eyes. Desperate for answers, I contacted Tom Yum Paradise. The manager, an elderly woman named Mrs. Lin, listened to my story with a worried expression. She confirmed that Sam, the delivery driver, had indeed been in an accident that night. He was in critical condition, unable to speak or provide any information about what happened. Mrs. Lin also revealed that they had never used metal containers for their food, and the description of the man who delivered my order didn't match any of their employees. She seemed genuinely concerned and offered to help investigate further, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I left the restaurant with more questions than answers. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. I began to wonder if the strange delivery was connected to something supernatural, something far beyond my understanding. That night, I couldn't bear to stay in my apartment. I checked into a hotel, hoping that a change of scenery might provide some respite. But the unease followed me. I double-checked the locks on the door and tried to calm my racing heart. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Did you enjoy your meal?" My blood ran cold. How did they get my number? I didn't reply, but the messages kept coming, each more disturbing than the last. Your door is open. I'm inside. Look behind you. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned around. The room was empty, but the fear was palpable. I couldn't stay there. I grabbed my things and fled, driving aimlessly through the city, unsure of where to go or what to do. In my desperation, I found myself at the door of an old friend, Mark. He was a paranormal investigator, someone I had always thought of as a bit eccentric. But now I needed his help. I explained everything to him, and to my surprise, he believed me. Mark had dealt with similar cases before, but this one was different. The malevolent force seemed to have a personal vendetta. He suggested a cleansing ritual, something to sever the connection between me and whatever entity was haunting me. We gathered the necessary materials and returned to my apartment. The air was thick with tension as Mark began the ritual, chanting ancient words and burning sage. The shadows seemed to grow darker, the room colder. I could feel the presence, watching, waiting. As the ritual reached its climax, a loud crash echoed through the apartment. The lights flickered, and a chilling wind swept through the room. Mark's chanting grew louder, more insistent. I closed my eyes, praying for it to end. When I opened them, the room was still. The oppressive energy was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. Mark looked exhausted but relieved. "It's over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I thanked Mark and promised to stay in touch. That night, I slept soundly for the first time since the incident. The nightmares were gone, and the apartment felt like my own again. But the relief was short-lived. A week later, I received another message from the unknown number. "Did you think you could escape?" My heart sank. The entity was still out there, waiting, watching. And I knew, deep down, that it wouldn't stop until it had what it wanted. Now, every night, I sleep with one eye open, always on edge, always waiting for the next message. Because sometimes, when you invite something dark into your life, it never truly leaves. Chapter 2. The clock showed 11:50 p.m. when I received the order. As a food delivery driver, I've had my share of odd requests at strange hours, but this one was peculiar. The address was for an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town, a place I'd never delivered to before. The order was simple: a single cheeseburger and fries from a local joint known for its late-night cravings. I pulled up to the house just before midnight. The place was dark, with only a faint light coming from a single window on the second floor. I grabbed the brown paper bag and stepped out of my car, feeling a chill run down my spine. The air was still, and an eerie silence enveloped the area. I rang the doorbell and waited. A minute passed, then another. I was about to ring again when the door creaked open. A tall, gaunt man stood in the doorway. His eyes were deep-set and hollow, and his skin was so pale it seemed almost translucent. "Good evening," he said in a voice that was barely more than a whisper. "You're right on time." I handed him the bag, and he took it with a trembling hand. "Thank you," he said, turning to go back inside. Before he could close the door, curiosity got the better of me. "Sir, do you need any utensils or napkins?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto mine. "No, thank you. We have everything we need," he replied. He paused, then added, "Would you like to come in for a moment? It's rather chilly out there." Every instinct told me to decline, but something about his gaze was compelling. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The interior of the house was dimly lit by flickering candles, casting long shadows on the walls. The air smelled musty, like old books and decaying wood. The man led me down a narrow hallway to a small dining room. There, on the table, was an old, worn photograph of a family, a mother, father, and 2 children. "That's my family," the man said, noticing my gaze. "They've been gone a long time now." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, unsure of what else to say. He smiled, a sad, distant smile. "Thank you. It's been hard, but we manage." Suddenly, I heard a noise from upstairs, a soft, rhythmic thumping, like the sound of footsteps. The man's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. "Is there someone else here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "My children," he replied, his voice now barely audible. "They don't sleep well at night." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Perhaps I should be going," I said, taking a step back towards the door. "Please stay a moment longer," he said, almost pleading. "They get so lonely. They'd love to meet you." Before I could respond, the thumping grew louder, more insistent. The man's gaze shifted to the doorway, and I followed his eyes. Standing there were two children, a boy and a girl, both pale and gaunt like their father. Their eyes were wide, almost unnaturally so, and their faces were devoid of any emotion. "Say hello to our guest," the man said softly. "Hello," the children said in unison, their voices hollow and echoing in the small room. I took another step back, my heart pounding in my chest. "I really need to go," I stammered, turning to leave. As I reached the front door, I heard the man's voice one last time. "Thank you for the delivery. It's been so long since we've had company." I practically ran to my car, not daring to look back. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man stood on the porch watching me go, his children by his side. When I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I tried to put the experience out of my mind, convincing myself it was just a creepy encounter. But the next morning, when I checked my delivery app, the address was gone. No record of the order, no trace of the house. It was as if it had never existed. To this day, I can still see their faces in my mind, their hollow eyes staring into mine. And every time I deliver a late-night order, I can't help but wonder if I'll be asked to make another midnight delivery to that haunting house on the outskirts of town. A week later, I found myself on another late-night shift. The orders were slow, and I couldn't shake the memory of that night. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a new order. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the address. It was the same Victorian house. I almost refused the order, but curiosity and a sense of duty pushed me to accept it. I drove to the house, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. As I approached, I noticed something strange. The house looked even more dilapidated than before. The windows were broken, and the garden was overgrown with weeds. I parked my car and stepped out, my breath visible in the chilly night air. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking as it swayed in the wind. I hesitated for a moment before pushing it open and stepping inside. The interior was in disarray, with furniture overturned and dust covering every surface. The flickering candles from before were now replaced by cobwebs and shadows. I called out, "Hello? I have your delivery," but my voice echoed through the empty house. I ventured further inside, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. The air was thick with the scent of decay. As I entered the dining room, I saw the photograph again, but this time, the faces of the family were scratched out, leaving only empty spaces where their eyes used to be. A sudden noise made me jump, a soft, shuffling sound coming from upstairs. Against my better judgment, I climbed the creaky staircase, each step feeling like a descent into madness. The hallway was dark, and the walls seemed to close in around me. I reached the top and followed the sound to a room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly open, and a dim light spilled out. I pushed the door open and froze. The room was filled with old, tattered toys and a single large mirror on the wall. In the mirror, I saw the reflection of the children, their hollow eyes staring back at me. But when I turned around, the room was empty. I looked back at the mirror, and the children were now standing right behind me, their cold breath on my neck. "Play with us?" they whispered in unison, their voices sending a chill down my spine. I backed away, stumbling over the toys on the floor. The door slammed shut, trapping me inside. The children's laughter filled the room, echoing off the walls. Desperately, I looked for a way out. My eyes fell on a small, dusty window. I ran to it and struggled to open it, finally managing to squeeze through. I fell to the ground outside, scraping my hands and knees. Without looking back, I ran to my car and sped away, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got home, I deleted the delivery app from my phone, vowing never to return to that house. But the memory of that night haunts me, and sometimes, late at night, I hear the children's laughter echoing in my mind.